Many of you know something or quite a bit about Garry and Robin Spry, but I'm sure you'll learn a lot more today about this industrious couple. Having both grown up on farms, the land has always remained close to their hearts. Their early married life was spent running a family farm near Drysdale, and at the same time they purchased and improved a bush block near Casterton. Eventually they sold to neighbours and moved to the Bellarine. In 1992, Garry was elected as Liberal member for Bellarine in the Victorian Parliament and sat as a backbencher until his retirement in 2002. He has also served on the local council and is past president of the Queenscliffe Historical Museum, being one of the key driving forces behind the establishment of the beautiful new museum that we now have in the hub in Hesse Street, Queenscliffe. Not ones to sit still and loving a project, in early 2020, Garry and Robin again purchased some land beside Lake Victoria, where they could pursue their joint passions focusing on the environment and regeneration. Garry will speak about his project to farm and regenerate the land, the surprises and the joys, while Robin, an avid twitcher and photographer, will describe the bird life that has returned to the land in conjunction with the regeneration. Please welcome Robin and Garry Spry.
Well, thank you for that very generous introduction. Thank you all for coming too, to listen to Robin and me. Many of you will have driven along Shell Road towards Ocean Grove and wondered what was going on in the no man's land just past the old cottage opposite Arcare. That old cottage was called Victoria Villa, and I'm sure most of you would know it. Robin and I have been invited here this morning to try to explain what we are trying to do with this land, which, as Missy said, we bought in early 2020, just before COVID, or just at the start of COVID. Now, pictures tell 1,000 words, as we all know. So this morning, Robin and I will be running a commentary on a number of slides which we've prepared. And thank you very much, Jim, wherever you are. Jim? As usual, Jim does the technical stuff around here, so if everything goes haywire, it's Jim's fault. I hope we all understand. So the first slide I want to produce is an overview of our location, just to remind you of where we are. Now, this is a drone picture taken a couple of weeks ago. It's a bit wobbly, as you'll see, because it was in a high wind and occasionally it'll wobble a bit, but that doesn't matter. Here we go. We're travelling over the Shellgate Works and looking west over Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria is about 139 hectares, about the size of Lake Wendouree in Ballarat. Now we're scanning round to the south, over the ponds there, into Point Lonsdale itself, past the golf course. You can see the lighthouse in the distance there. We scan further round to Point Nepean, over the Rip. It's an interesting shot, isn't it, from above? And then back over Queenscliffe, which we probably should dwell on a bit longer, but we're not. That's Lakers Cutting in the foreground with Burnt Point in the background. Swan Bay, this tiny little village here is, of course, the Point development, the Breeze. And we're coming now, that's the wetlands behind the Breeze and back up Lake Victoria. Now our particular block of land, which I think with a bit of luck we'll be able to focus on if this thing goes fast enough, the drone is travelling into the wind, and the wind's by this stage about 15 knots. So it has a bit of trouble travelling into the wind, as you imagine. But we'll get there eventually. So here we go, back into the wind. Can you see the wobble on the thing? That's because the wind's wobbling a bit. They're pretty good, these drones. They've got very good cameras. This drone happens to be about 10 years old now, I suppose. And I'm still learning how it works. But can you just pause it there for a moment, Rob? Up in the background, to the right, if I can, if I can point it out. Do you see that little village up there? That's Colindina. Now Colindina, years ago, was just a woodland on sandy soil, and when rain fell, it would mainly be absorbed. Nowadays, with all the development there are roofs, there are gutters, there are roads, and all the rain doesn't just get absorbed into the land anymore, it flows off into the lake. Now, I'm not suggesting the lake is made less salty, because the fresh water, of course, flows on the top of the lake, and I'll tell you later where it comes out. But it's interesting to note that there's more and more water coming into that lake because of the development of Colandina and the surrounding catchment. It's pretty big, the catchment. Thanks, Rob. Now, this is a very interesting picture. It's about the earliest we could get. It's 1863. It shows Salt Lake, if I can find the machine, just there. And it was still called Salt Lake until fairly recently. 1863, you can see the sand and limestone ridges here, running right along here, and in the interim, the flat land running between Bagola wetlands, which you ran out of here on the left, and eventually into Swan Bay. Now, I've got a theory, rightly or wrongly, that those flatlands were once connected to Bass Strait. Now, I'm indebted to Vivian Howell, a local person who I've spoken to about what happened between early European settlement and the present day to the land we're talking about, the outskirts of Point Lonsdale and Queenscliffe. I'll try not to press the wrong button, Rob. This is the area that we're concerned about. Our little farm runs from about there. That button is on Victoria Villa, which has now been demolished, and it's about to be rebuilt on, I believe. Our land runs from there through to about there. So we've got about 750 metres of frontage to Shell Road and also to Lake Victoria. Very interesting piece of land if it wasn't so sort of messed up. A couple of farms started early in the piece, around about the late or mid to late 1800s. In 1931, Alex Laker, a young electrician and entrepreneur who lived with his family in Gellibrand Street next to the Queenscliffe Hotel, and went on to become a prominent and highly respected member of the community, life of the borough, had a crack at reviving salt production, which had been tried in the 1880s, and eventually, not long after, 1892, it was abandoned. But according to Alex's son Chris, another well-known figure in the local fabric of the borough, to whom I'm indebted for his recollections, and a few of the images we're about to show, he told me that the salt mining didn't last very long, because Alex, in the meantime, with this little machine, and you can, if you can imagine this little skimmer taking the salt off the top of the lake where it had embedded itself or where it had formed, underneath that skimmer, Alex Laker discovered a far more lucrative seam, and it was shellgrit. And that relates back to that earlier picture I showed you, the early 1863 picture. And the shellgrit industry is germane to what I'm about to talk about, because it's had a good effect and a bad effect. The industry itself took out hundreds of thousands of cubic metres of shellgrit, processed it by washing it, tumbling it, crushing the rock, which is almost pure calcium carbonate, discarding the sand, and selling either in bulk or in bags the finished product to either the glass industry or the poultry industry, and it had a couple of other applications as well. Can you hear me up at the back still? Right. So what else have I got to say about that little fella? Yes. Can you move right on, please, Rob? So Alex, this is in the eastern part of Lake Victoria, if you can imagine it, not far from where the present shellgrit works are now. And that's the sort of infrastructure that Alex Laker developed. He was some entrepreneur. And anyway, they're hoppers. So he'd somehow dump the shellgrit on top of those, and those hoppers would fill the trucks to take them off the market, or alternatively they might have been hoppers processing the raw material. But I think they're the finished product. Hundreds of tonnes of this stuff have been processed and sold mainly in Victoria, but beyond as well. They probably employed in the region of, I don't know, 20 people. The industry was amazingly important in the fabric of this borough because it returned a lot of money. But anyway, the McMahon family, which is well known in Geelong, they then took over this area while Alex Laker moved to the north. And mine sheltered in what is now the Point development, huge area there, and eventually into what we now know as Laker's Cutting. Because Laker's Cutting was once just a sugar bed, basically. It was all taken out, and now that the water from Swan Bay, of course, flows into Laker's Cutting, and they tell me there's very good brim fishing there if you want to dangle a line sometime. Thanks, Rob. This, I think Rob's moving me on. This, it just gives you an indication of the size and scale of what the industry became. This is an enormous dump truck, bogged to the eyeballs in, I think, in what is now the Point. You can imagine trying to get out of there. And that reminds me of a story that Dodd once told about a couple of blokes who were following one of the vehicles in through the sandy country near somewhere in the Springs area, because it used to be very sandy in the early days. And one of them rushed up to the driver and he said, quick, stop. My mate's buried up to his heels. And the fellow in the driving seat said, well, that doesn't matter much. Yes, but he's upside down. So that gives you, just before you move on, so I guess it gives you an indication that the sugar industry was not a very delicate operation. It was pretty brutal, to be honest with you. And I think we all realise that. Next thing, Rob. And that gives you an indication of what the country looked like after the sugar was taken out. That's our fence line there. This is our neighbour to the west, the Kearneys. It was brutalised. The sand that I was talking about, which was separated from the shore grid, was being pumped back into the property, into these areas where the shore was taken out of, to try to fill some of the holes. But in addition, with the best intentions, local tradies were invited to bring some euphemistically named clean fill into the worked out sugarwood fields to further reinstate the land, but that brought some unwanted side effects, as we shall see. So you can imagine that land, there she lies, half full of water, and the local tradies coming in, invited to bring their clean fill in. But unfortunately the clean fill included rocks, bricks, concrete, pipe, you name it, it came in, because it wasn't, they weren't able to supervise it very well. So anyway, that's what came in. Can we have the next one? Over time, however, and this is a shot taken nearly 40 years later, again with a drone, a couple of days ago, looking back over our property, that's our boundary fence down there, back towards Queenscliffe and the Point, and it just gives you an indication of how time will heal the worst deprivations that you can visit on such land. So it began to regenerate. Not very quickly, but eventually land will heal itself, as we all know. Thanks, Rob. This is one I won't dwell on, but I might come back to it later if we've got time. And it deals with the hydrology of this entire area and where does Lake Victoria lead to when it overflows. Because in the past, it overflowed quite badly into the low-lying parts of Point Lonsdale and flooded around the Hollywood Boulevard. So that little canal there is now, which was built in about 1995 or so, now takes the overflow out through the Point development, out into out through Lake Cutting and back into Swan Bay. I mentioned clean fill. Unfortunately, the invitation of the locals was abused a bit, and the properties were left with a legacy of the things that I've mentioned before. In addition, and perhaps more significantly, a plethora of exotic weeds came in with the fill. Early in 2020, we commissioned a vegetation survey by Mark Trengove, who you all perhaps know. Mark identified some 76 different species of noxious weeds, some of them pretty bad. We soon realised, very soon after we bought it in 2020, realised what we're up against. And I wanted to call the property Tom's Folly, Tom being an acronym for The Old Man, which is me. And we bandied that about. But Robin and the family had none of that. They were made of sterner stuff and promptly named the property Wirilda by the lake. So forget about Tom's Folly, let's move on, let's do something decent with the property and see if we can clean it up. The next one, thanks Rob. Weeds and rubbish. Well, that just gives you an indication of some of the weeds. They're not significant weeds, that's only wild radish or something, but you know, it was pretty tall and a bit frightening when we came into it. Next thing. We were always going to try and farm the land because it had been a farm before and it's zone farming. And so we turned our mind to what we could put on it. First of all, we thought about cattle or sheep, and Peter Lee, where is he? He was going to be the livestock manager, and he was pretty keen to put belted Galloways. no, the old belted Galloways. But the fences were no good, and in any case, the very delicate plants on that area, on that saline saltbush area, if we put cloven hoofed animals onto that, sheep, cattle, goats, whatever you like, they would have cut it up. So that was really incompatible with what we wanted. First of all though, we had to clean the land up. It was covered in these weeds, one of which was, or three of which I'll name. There was boxthorn, its botanical name is Lycium ferocissumum. And boy, was it ferocious. And I'll show you a shot or two of that in a minute. But this slide's meant to demonstrate that we had to buy fairly heavy machinery to get rid of it, of that and other weeds. We tried it with the Prado, pulling the boxthorn out with Prado, and some of the boxthorn trunks were that big. They were big. But we realised we'd have to buy a tractor. So having bought the tractor, you can't just leave the tractor out in the open, so we had to build a shed, and then from the shed we had to put power and water on to service things properly, and one thing led to another. Right, the working bee. So the girls got to work, the whole family, and that's a couple of the girls and someone on a tractor there, and that's yours truly with a pair of hairy gloves, because the boxthorn's got spurs on it, 2 or 3 inches long, and they can hurt. So if you're not wearing elbow length gloves, and preferably eye covers, you can get into a bit of trouble. And we had dozens and dozens of spikes on our arms and shoulders and backs and legs and goodness knows what. But eventually we, perhaps take another one? Yeah, that's the tractor with a load of boxthorn. And we take that over to a dump somewhere. Yeah, that's pulled out by the roots. Yeah, we've adopted a slightly different technique now where we cut it off with a little reciprocating saw, which is much more delicate. It's more like a brain surgeon than an axeman. And we paint that with glyphosate. You'll be disgusted to hear, but that's the only way we can get rid of it. Because if we pull it with a tractor, we're damaging all the moonas that it's entangled with. So we'd prefer to take it out limb by limb. Okay, moving right on. So there she goes. And we estimate that we've burnt so far, crushed and burnt, because when we take it to the pile, we crush it, some 600 cubic metres of this material. And up she goes, and boy, doesn't she burn. She just goes up like a rocket. This is Sam, our daughter, and I'm on the tractor, I think. And Sam wanted to establish this fascinating hugel mound type vegetable garden where you lay down logs. On top of the logs you put green material, on top of that you put soil, and you plant your veggies in that, and away she goes. And it works very well because the logs seem to suck up the moisture and there's quite a warm environment. The rats love it. So anyway, that's got going, and that's developed into something a bit better now, fully fenced, and it produces bucket loads. For example, this year we produced a huge pile of pumpkins. Next one, Rob. Okay, so here we are, we're moving into our tree farming venture. So we planted some couple of hundred different species of trees that first year, trying to find out which, if any, would do well. We planted eucalypts, we planted wattles, we planted callistemons, we planted a whole lot of other different sort of trees. And sad to say, most of them didn't do too well. I joined the Otway Agroforestry Network to try and get some expertise into this. And a couple of gentlemen very kindly came down and did a survey of the property, and they said, "No, you're on the wrong track here, mate. You should be growing local, salt-tolerant, coastal species like moonas, boobiella, a few of the other well-known indigenous species endemic to this area." So that's what we've, if you move on, Rob, you can see the trees there. Okay, they've got a few leaves on them, that's after about 2 years, but they're not thriving. And it's because they're not suited to this area particularly. I think Rosemary would agree with me there, probably. So, moving on. Some of the trees that were the trees and shrubs, their seeds had been grown. By this time, Sam, our eldest daughter, was taking a bit of an interest. She'd come back from overseas, and she was propagating native shrubs and trees. And we planted these shrubs and trees in that area, and we planted about 150. Believe it or not, we've got 100% strike, which is unbelievable. So that's them, and they've a lot of mulch went into them, watered the first year just to keep them going, but 100% have actually taken, which is amazing. Thanks, Rob. What the boys from Otway Forestry Network, Agroforestry Network advised us to do was to start a nursery and perhaps a bush tucker and bush medicine venture instead of going for these tall trees. And so the girls in particular, who have now taken a big interest in what we're doing, because after all it's their inheritance, I suppose, they've set up this nursery near the shed, on the shed, and they're now propagating those seeds and doing a few cuttings and things, not to sell them in competition with the local nurserymen, the volunteer nurseries around here, but just to supply our own needs. And we'll do that, and we'll be growing perhaps 1,000 trees and shrubs and grasses and things every year, and trying to rewild the entire property. That's what we're on about.